If you want hard-hitting drums, you need to be using these 3 steps. I'm going to start by playing the raw drums for you without any processing on them, and then I'm going to click in our plugins and you can hear the difference these 3 quick steps make to our drum mix. So here's our drums without any processing on them. You can hear our drums hit so much harder when I put our plugins in. They have so much more punch, so much more attack, and they really gonna sit so much better inside our mix. But let's jump in here to our 3 quick steps. We're gonna look specifically at our kick and our snare drum, and we're gonna look at this 3-step plugin chain to get hard hitting drums. Focusing in on our kick drum here. Let me take off all our plugins. I'll put these 2 limiters on. These are just catching some peaks on the way in to get us a little bit more even kick drum before we head into our first step. Our first step here, our first quick step, is to cut away anything we don't want on the kick drum. For me, for this kick drum here, that means a high pass filter and 1 notch in the mid-range here. We'll start with just the high pass filter, 12 dB per octave slope. I have it rolled up to about 38 hertz here, 37.2 hertz, just taming the sub area. So as we push into the rest of our chain, we don't have excess bottom end overloading the rest of our plugin chain. So here's without that high pass, and then I'll kick it in. Listen to how it focuses the bottom end on our kick drum. Just this one move alone can get you more punch out of your kick drum by shifting the focus in the bottom end from everything that's in the sub area below about 40 hertz to more of that 60, 70, 80 hertz area. That's that frequency range that hits you in the chest. That's what's going to make your drums feel punchy, especially your kick drum here. So using our high pass here to clean up our bottom end and focus more on this 50, 60, 70, 80 hertz area rather than the 40 hertz and below, which a lot of times you don't hear on smaller speakers anyway. So we want our kick drum to have punch across the board. Now the other thing I'm cutting away here was a little bit of ringing, that was going on in the mid-range. So we're at 796 hertz. You can see I have the Q all the way up, so it's a narrow notch filter, and we're all the way down, pulling out 24 dB here at around 800 hertz. So take a listen without, and then I'll kick this cut in, and I'll also boost it up so you can hear the ringing frequency that we're cutting out here on the kick drum. It takes away this distracting ringing that's going on in the mid-range, so it cleans up some of the mid-range on our kick drum. Again, shifting our focus from things we don't want, some bottom end, some mid-range, more towards that hit around 80 hertz, and then making some room in the top end as well. This kind of also cleans out some of that basketball sound that we get in the mid-range. So 2 moves here for our first step. Just cutting away what we don't need on the drum, here on our kick drum to start. Now step number 2 is going to be to compress the drum. Here on the kick drum, I'm using the stock compressor. I've got the attack at 30 milliseconds and the release at 60 milliseconds. So kind of a medium slow attack here and a faster, medium fast release. This way we let the initial transient pop through on the drum, and our release lets go in time to not squash the next hit. So we're letting the kick drum come through, letting that initial transient pop through before our compressor comes down, and then our compressor is letting go before the next kick hit comes through so we don't squash anything. All of this is going to emphasize that initial transient, that initial spike and attack on our kick drum to give us more punch and make our kick drum hit harder inside the track. 3-to-1 ratio, 30 millisecond attack, 60 millisecond release. We're going to be doing about 8 dB of reduction here on the kick drum to really emphasize that initial transient. So here's without, and then I'll kick it in. Pay attention to our gain reduction and listen to how it changes the tone on our kick drum. You can hear we're really clamping down on the kick drum here, but it's bringing up so much of that front end punch and that front end attack, that's really going to cut through and come through as hard hitting inside the track. Now, I know we lost some bottom end, but that's where step 3 comes in. So step 1, we're cutting away what we don't need. Step 2 is we're using our compressor to get so much more attack and transient out of our drum. And step number 3, you've probably guessed it, is boosting what we do want on the kick drum. For me, that means top end, pre-compression, and then bottom end, post-compression. Starting here before the compressor, I'm going to boost, where are we at? 18 dB at 9K. This is going to bring up a ton of click on the top end of the kick drum and really give us way more attack that's going to cut through everything else that's going on in this track. Guitars, background vocals, keys, bass, what have you. This is going to make sure our kick cuts through on smaller speakers. So take a listen without this boost and then with. Gives our kick drum so much more energy there. We're doing 18 dB. I know it seems like a lot of boost here, and we get a little bit of extra bleed coming through from the cymbals, but it's not that much that we want to sacrifice this boost, right? So 18 dB at 9K gives us a ton of click, and it brings up all of that attack that we just emphasized in step 2 with our compressor. So that's our first boost. The next area I'm boosting is bottom end. I like to boost bottom end post-compression once everything is even here. So we're doing about 7 dB at 80 hertz here. This is going to give us all of that low-end punch that we want out of our kick drum here. So here's without the boost and then with 7 dB at 80 hertz. That's the frequency that hits you hard there on the kick drum. So there's our 3 steps. Like I said, we're going to look at our kick drum and our snare drum. So we're going to move over here now and we're going to do the same process or look at the same 3 steps on our snare drum here. So looking at our first EQ, same thing. I've got a couple limiters, just shaving off some of the peaks before we go into our first EQ. Step number 1, remember, is we want to cut away what we don't need on the drum. So here on our snare drum, I want to get rid of excess bottom end. So as we push into compression and we start boosting on the snare drum, we don't bring up any excess sub area that's coming from the kick drum, any kind of proximity effect from the microphone being close mic'd on the snare drum. So I'm pulling in a high pass filter all the way up to 138 hertz here, coming up right underneath the fundamental frequency range on the snare drum. 12 dB per octave slope. Take a listen without and then with on our snare drum. Really gets rid of a ton of kick bleed in the bottom end and some tom bleed. So as he rolls from the snare onto the toms, it wipes out all of that bottom end bleed that's coming through on the toms and really makes sure all of the processing we layer on here on the snare drum focuses just on the snare drum. So that's our first step. Just one move here on the snare drum. So our first move, cutting away what we don't need, varies a little bit from drum to drum, but the main idea here, excuse me, I can't talk today. The main idea here is to get rid of anything that's in the way of what we want to emphasize on our snare drum. So getting rid of any of that sub area there. Rolling into step 2, we're going to use our compressor, same way we did on the kick drum. I have the attack dialed up a little bit faster because we have a faster transient coming off of the snare drum, but still keeping it kind of medium slow. We're at 20 milliseconds here or so, 21.9 milliseconds on the attack, and then a 60 millisecond release here. So same kind of release. We want the compressor to let go in time so it doesn't step on the next hit of the snare drum. Keeping our attack here medium slow to let that initial transient pop through, but I have it a little bit faster because we have a sharper transient on the snare drum. Still a 3-to-1 ratio. We're going to be doing a little bit less compression on the snare drum because it doesn't need as much taming or tightening as the kick drum does. So take a listen without the compressor, and then I'll kick it in here. Doing about 6 to 7 dB reduction here, and it gives us that nice slamming sound on the snare drum that makes it feel hard hitting when we drop it into the rest of the drum mix there. So that's our step number 2. And then step number 3 is boosting what we do want on our snare drum. So coming back to our first EQ, boosting top end pre-compression and then bottom end post-compression. I'm going to do a 9 dB boost up at 9K here. This is going to bring up all that beautiful top end we want on the snare drum, that nice crispness and that nice crack that we want to hear. So take a listen without and then with this 9 dB boost at 9K. Drastically brightens up our snare drum here and gives us all that brightness, that crackle, and that crispness that we want to hear from the bottom snares. And then the other boost I'm doing here, pre-compression, is a big mid-range boost here. The same way you're selling mid-range on guitars, you're selling mid-range on snare drum if you want it to hit hard. This is where the majority of the attack is sitting on your snare drum. That's where that slamming sound comes from. So a 9.5 dB boost at about 1.5K, 1.81K. I've got it wider as well, so it reaches up into the high mids and down a little bit into the mid-range as well. So take a listen without and then take a listen with. Listen to the difference it makes in the attack and the transient of our snare drum. That dramatically increases the energy we're getting from our snare drum, and it pushes it into a different league in terms of attack and transient. And last but not least, still in our step 3 here, boosting bottom end post compression. We're down at 141 hertz here. This is where that bottom end cut comes in our first step. If we didn't have this high pass filter here, when we come at the end of the chain to boost bottom end, we're going to bring up all that kick bleed and all that tom bleed. So having that first step in place, make sure we can cleanly boost bottom end on snare drum and get that bottom end punch that we want out of this drum. So about 4 dB, 3.84 dB at 141 hertz. Take a listen to how this affects the tone and hit of our snare drum. Now our snare drum is going to sit right with our kick drum, and these are both going to hit really, really hard. So let's take a listen to both of them now, our kick and our snare, and I'll bypass our plugins. You can hear the before and the after, and I'll throw it back into the entire drum mix and A/B it for you as well. Three quick steps to get hard hitting drums. Step number one is we're cutting away what we don't need with EQ, rolling off a little bit of sub area here on our kick drum, same kind of thing on our snare drum, pulling out any mid-range that's kind of nasty or ringing and distracting from the rest of our frequency range. Step number two is we are using a compressor to get more attack and more punch out of our drum on the kick drum and on the snare drum. 30 millisecond attack, 60 millisecond release, making sure we have enough time for the initial transient to come through so we can emphasize it inside the mix. And then step number three, back to our EQ and boosting what we want to emphasize on our drum. So bringing up top end to get brightness, to get more attack out of the drum, and then boosting bottom end at the end of the chain, post compression, to bring up that low end punch we want to hear out of our drums. I hope that was helpful for you if you are looking to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process in its entirety and really start to hone your workflow as an audio engineer. Then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's just a simple PDF guide that will walk you through the entire mixing process step by step to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without any more of the guesswork. Completely free. You can get that below by clicking the link in the video description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.